Alaska is many things to many people. The 50th state is often called the last frontier, and even a quick passing glimpse of the state's varied ecosystems can give you a sense that Alaska lives up to its nickname. I'm no stranger to Alaska. I first visited Sitka, Alaska as a college student in 1975, followed by a short trip to Anchorage in 1977 en route to a summer in Africa. My wife and I cruised the Inside Passage in 2013, stopping in Ketchikan. I went snorkeling with bald eagles. In Juneau, we witnessed humpback whales bubble nut feeding. And in Skagway, we took in the history of the Alaskan gold rush. In Haines, we rafted down the Chilkat River, home to the largest gathering of bald eagles in the world. Perhaps the highlight of the cruise was slipping into Glacier Bay National Park and witnessing the incredible size and power of the glaciers that give the park its name. Glacier Bay National Park is just one of 8 national parks in the state. Even the largest cruise ship can provide you with front row seats to the massive glaciers that calve their ice into the bay. Arriving in Seward, we boarded the Alaska Railroad for a scenic trip to Anchorage. From there, we acquired a rental car and drove to Talkeetna en route to Denali National Park. Home of the tallest mountain in North America, we also had our first opportunity to witness some of Alaska's signature wildlife. These trips were incredible, but we had always wanted to visit Alaska on our terms, to go where we wanted to go and to stay as long as we wanted to without other tourists intruding on our experience. That opportunity came quite unexpectedly in August of 2024. A good photography friend of ours was set to go on a private Alaskan excursion when a sudden medical problem forced him to cancel. Unfortunately, the funds he and his wife had already paid were non-refundable, but he was allowed to transfer his reservation to any other party. 2 weeks later, my wife and I flew to Dallas to make our connecting flight to Alaska. Before long, we were looking out at the mountains and glaciers of Alaska's southeastern coast from 35,000 feet en route to Anchorage. 5,000 miles and nearly 8 hours of flying time later, we landed in Anchorage. A shuttle took us to Merrifield Inn, right across the street from the airfield, where we would continue our travel the next morning. After a good night's sleep, we checked in at Lake and Penn Air for our final flight to Port Ellsworth in the heart of Lake Clark National Park. The terminal was small but full of character. A whalebone was the prominent feature at the customer service counter, and airplane props and engine cowlings helped add to the sense of Alaska bush pilot chic. When checking in, we were required to weigh ourselves along with our luggage. While the Cessna Grand Caravan fueled up, we were reminded that our plane did have a limited payload capacity. Securely on board, it was time to take off for our final leg to Stonewood Lodge at Lake Clark National Park. Our flight plan took us over Cook Inlet as we traveled 165 miles over water, mountains, and glaciers. After an hour of flying, we descended into the Lake Clark area. The small gravel runway in the distance was our final destination, Port Ellsworth. Our plane travel complete, it was time to gather our gear and head for a waiting boat. Our gear was loaded up into a pickup truck while the airport mascot made sure that everything was on the up and up. Then we took a very short ride down to the other end of the runway to meet our boat that would take us across Lake Clark to our lodge. Just because we had flown into a remote region of Alaska, it didn't mean that we were necessarily going to be roughing it. Quite the contrary. Stonewood Lodge was 13,000 square feet of Alaskan wilderness luxury. The lodge's dining and living room area left you no doubt where you were. With mounted animals everywhere, even the table lamps were custom made. Preston Kavner, the owner of Stonewood Lodge, has been a professional guide for over 20 years. The mounts from his hunting and fishing expeditions displayed a wide range of wildlife. Brown bears, moose, bighorn sheep, and trophy trout were just some of the examples of mounts that were prominently displayed throughout the lodge. Lake Clark, while in a very remote part of Alaska, is still fairly well populated on a seasonal basis. The lake was only designated a national park in December 2nd, 1980. Because of this, residents with private property were grandfathered into the park. Entry into the park is by bush plane, float plane, or boat. All supplies have to be flown in or barged in from Cook Inlet. Stonewood Lodge would be our home base for the next 5 days. While there was no television or local radio, the lodge did have a Starlink satellite connection that allowed texting and email service. Honestly, I couldn't imagine why anyone would want to come to this part of Alaska to stay in a lodge and watch TV. It was time to get down to business. With a runway directly behind the lodge, Preston prepared his 4-seat Cessna for our flight. With a full load of fuel and camera gear stowed, we were off for a 45-minute flight to Funnel Creek on the northwest corner of Katmai National Park. After a final instrument check, our destination coordinates were loaded into a GPS unit as we taxied to the runway preparing for takeoff. The initial cloud cover was very low. As we climbed above Lake Clark, at times we were flying less than 100 feet above the terrain. At that low altitude, it was relatively easy to spot wildlife on the ground. Crossing Iliamna Lake, we flew due south into Katmai National Park, arriving at Funnel Creek. Preston made a number of low-level passes to see where the bears were that morning. The answer to that question was quite simple. They were everywhere. During our first time landing on the tundra, I was a bit apprehensive, but with underinflated bush tires on the plane, it wasn't nearly as rough as I thought that it might be. At Funnel Creek, there's a generally accepted landing area that can actually be seen from Google Earth. Float planes also have a specific landing zone on a small nearby lake. After landing, we gathered our photography gear and headed a few hundred yards to the confluence of Funnel Creek and Moraine Creek. Stepping out onto the tundra, I had this sudden feeling of extreme isolation. At Katmai, the U.S. Census Bureau hasn't done a population study here. The reason for it is, quite simple. Bears, 2,200. Population of humans, 0. There was no place to hide, no safe place to run to. We were truly one with nature, and knowing how to behave in a situation like this was crucial to one's survival. One quick scan of the horizon revealed 2 brothers engaged in play fighting. Looking down on the riverbank in another direction, brown bears were either in the water or patrolling the banks, engaged in their all-consuming favorite activity, looking for salmon. As we hiked along the riverbank, it was impossible not to run into bears. The official park rules state that you must try to stay at least 50 yards away from the bears. Of course, the bears, they didn't read those park rules. As long as we were on the tundra, the bears ignored us and just walked right up to us as they passed by on the edge of the river. As far as the bears were concerned, we really didn't even exist. They were so busy looking for salmon that on several occasions, they would walk right up to us. Even in the relaxed environment, the key to not becoming bear treats was simple. Don't panic, and especially don't run. Many of the bears were sows with cubs. Television documentaries often point out that triplets are rather rare for bears, yet at Funnel Creek, they were commonplace. Katmai brown bears can have up to 4 cubs. In late August, sows were beginning to teach their cubs the value of a good salmon dinner. Hibernation was approaching, so it was time to start packing on the pounds. Cubs that didn't bulk up probably wouldn't survive the winter, but with the river relatively shallow, it was easy to see the migrating salmon and even easier to chase after them. The year before, we had traveled to Vancouver Island to photograph grizzly bears. I am often asked, what is the difference between a grizzly and a brown bear? According to the National Park Service, grizzlies and brown bears are actually subspecies of the same bear group. In fact, brown bears are grizzlies, but with minor genetic differences. Brown bears in Katmai are substantially larger than grizzlies. The male grizzly that we photographed in British Columbia probably weighed up to about 700 pounds. A female grizzly would weigh on average about half that. Some reports state that male grizzlies can weigh up to 1,000 pounds, but that would be an exceptional bear. Compared to a black bear, grizzlies are huge, but put them up to a Katmai brown bear and they suddenly seem rather small. A Katmai male brown bear can weigh in at over 1,000 pounds in the fall, with females weighing about 1/3 less. The grizzlies of British Columbia live in a very different habitat from the Katmai brown bears found at Funnel Creek. Grizzlies thrive in forested areas and along the coastal regions of Vancouver Island. The brown bears of Funnel Creek live on the tundra, while the brown bears in Brooks Falls live in an area that is heavily forested. At Funnel Creek, the bears are subjected to an open landscape that comes with high winds and brutally cold winters, just another reason why hibernation is vital for survival. In both cases, a common food source is salmon. With up to 5 species of salmon migrating into freshwater streams, bears are a keystone species that help other species survive. Grizzlies and brown bears need to eat other foods when salmon are not migrating, and for that reason, they are considered to be omnivores. Brown bears that live on the coastal flats have mastered the art of clam digging, and our guide was eager to take us to Hallow Bay. Unfortunately, our timing couldn't have been any worse. While taking several low passes over the grass, we only spotted one cow with 3 cubs. Worse, the tide was almost at its highest. With the tide in, the tidal flats were underwater, so we weren't going to see the bears digging for clams. Preston decided to land the plane anyway, and he found a place that was relatively free of driftwood. As soon as we got out of the plane, we could see that we were in the right place, just not at the right time. The beach was loaded with bear prints. After eating a quick lunch, we decided to get back on the plane and once again flew to Funnel Creek. We hoped that since the bear sightings were so good the day before, we might continue to have some good sightings today. 30 minutes later, we landed on the tundra to continue our search. Like the day before, it didn't take long to spot several bears. I secured my camera to my tripod and began hiking the trail that followed the riverbank. Following the trail, we diverted alongside Moraine Creek to get further upstream from where we had been the previous day. Before long, we spotted a sow with 3 cubs as they were preparing to cross the stream. It appeared that they were headed right for us. Finding a good vantage point, we waited for their crossing. I had set my camera next to a small tributary that was flowing into Moraine Creek. It was a small stream, but as luck would have it, our bear family was headed right towards it. We backed off a few yards to make sure that we gave this sow her space, but she continued to approach us. Realizing that we couldn't outrun her, we held our ground and our nerves. To our surprise, she came up to within 20 feet of us, looked at her cubs, and then gave them a grunt. It was as if to say, "Stay here while I go walk up the stream for a while." With that, she was off, and we were left to babysit 3 brown bear cubs. Her 3 cubs seemed very healthy and were clearly experiencing their first summer. Brown bear cubs stay with their mother for 2 or possibly 3 years. There's a lot to learn on the tundra, and so this extended time with their mother is crucial. If they learn their lessons well, they will live to be up to 20 years or possibly even older. Brown bear cubs are usually born in their mother's winter den during the months of January and February. The brown bear cubs are tiny and hairless, At birth, they will weigh only about a half a pound. They are completely dependent upon their mother's milk and her warmth. Leaving their den around April or May, the cubs face a daunting challenge to stay alive. The only other predator that could possibly be a threat is a male brown bear, but mothers are relentless and will stand up to nearly any challenger. These cubs seemed puzzled at who we were, and with only a few bushes between them and us, we each stood our ground for about 15 minutes while their mother went exploring. What seemed like an eternity later, their mother came wading back down the small stream. She looked at us once again, gave another grunt, gathered her cubs, and they slowly strolled back towards Moraine Creek. I guess now I can add another job skill to my resume: bear babysitter. As their mother collected the bear cubs, I let out a huge sigh of relief. I was on a huge adrenaline rush. It's not every day that you get to be that close to a bear family, and we were extremely fortunate. During that time of year, food is very, very plentiful, and so as a result, I think that was one of the reasons why our bears were so, well, I guess you could say friendly towards us, relatively speaking. Immediately after coming out of hibernation, though, food resources are mainly limited to grass, berries, and other sedges. If the bears are lucky enough to be living along a coastal beach, they can also supplement their diet with clams and washed-up marine carcasses. But the main event for all bears is the return of the salmon for an annual salmon run that takes them up into the freshwater streams within the park. It's during this time that bears bulk up for the winter. To the casual observer, their eating habits appear to be very sloppy. By only eating parts of the salmon, the rest of the fish is left for scavengers, but nothing truly goes to waste. Foxes and seagulls were just a few examples of the species that take advantage of these sloppy eaters. Yet even here there are variations. Some bears will eat the entire fish, as we witnessed here, while others will go for salmon skin, brains, and roe. Bears that are undernourished will devour the entire salmon, while bears that are approaching their maximum sustainable weight will be much more selective. This practice of selective breeding is called high grading. When a bear is high grading, it's only selecting the highest caloric content of a fish. Sockeye salmon, for example, may contain as much as 4,500 calories, so a bear that is nearing its maximum weight may only eat the highest caloric portion of a fish. Bears that are less fortunate, or bears that have been having trouble catching salmon, will eat the entire fish, as we witnessed on this one occasion. As our bear family crossed Moraine Creek, we couldn't help but be amazed at just how intimate our encounter had been. As this family of brown bears walked away from us, I knew that this experience would be a lifetime memory. As we hiked back towards our bush plane, we very nearly walked right into a brood of ptarmigan. They had built their nest right on the ground, just off the trail that we were using. With very little fear, they allowed us to walk right up to one of them. One male ptarmigan actually walked out to get a better look at us from only a few feet away. A non-migratory bird, ptarmigan have the ability to go through one of the most dramatic plumage changes in the birding world. Going from mottled plumage that is perfect for the tundra, their plumage changes to pure white once winter arrives. Like every other animal on the tundra, there's no place to hide. Only one's camouflage and the ability to fly saves these birds from predators like foxes when they come calling. As we continued hiking, we passed by a colony of seagulls. Most of these were glaucous gulls, and they were here for one thing only: salmon. Batting cleanup after the brown bears, they were the true scavengers of the tundra. Anything left in the water or on the riverbanks would be taken care of by the hundreds of gulls that were all too eager to obtain an easy meal. As we came back to our bush plane, it was time to load up and leave Funnel Creek once and for all. Even as we put our camera equipment back in the plane, we could still see brown bears walking along the riverbanks of Funnel Creek and Moraine Creek. In just a few more months, Katmai National Park would be in the grips of the Arctic winter. The ptarmigan's plumage would be pure white, and the brown bears would be ready to find a den to do what seemed sensible to us: sleep it off. Since we weren't so inclined to build a den, we boarded our plane, took one last look at this incredible wilderness, and then flew out on our first leg that would eventually take us back to Florida. While Katmai National Park may not be the best place for humans to live, the brown bears of Katmai seem to be doing just fine. Around Funnel Creek, there's no development pressure on the park, no roads, no lodges, and strict controls to maintain its pristine nature as it has been for thousands of years. We should use these principles to manage our other wild places by simply leaving them alone. Yet there's so much pressure to develop wilderness areas if natural resources are found on them or in its lands. The greatest natural resource of any wilderness area is its true natural beauty and the wildlife that lives there. Alaska has proven that you don't need to develop wilderness areas for them to become profitable to private industry and state coffers. Careful management of these resources has given Alaska an economic bonanza. Between May of 2023 through April of 2024, 3 million visitors came to Alaska. As we left Katmai, I knew that my wife and I would probably never be able to come back to this pristine environment, but our digital cards from our cameras were full. Even if those images didn't turn out, however, our memories were guaranteed to stay with us forever. From bear life to sea life, the wilderness of Alaska delivers in a remarkable way. They call Alaska the last frontier, but for how much longer will it hold this title? The answer is quite simple. It's totally up to us.